We are looking at Reaction Assignment 3, which discusses projected returns and probabilities for two different franchise investments. And all of these numbers are in millions. So the first question asks, which is the most likely projected return for franchise X? So in looking at the situation that's most likely, we come here to where we see the weight or probability column, and we see which one has the greatest value. So which of these three options is the largest? So this probability right here, the 0.5, that's the largest of them. So this average return for NFL franchise X is also the most likely. Now, is this the same as the best case scenario? And not necessarily. The best case scenario is this highest projected return, which would be 163.5 million. However, it is the least likely to happen. It's got the lowest probability right here. Now, the next question asks, in which franchise is the worst case scenario more likely? So let's look at the worst case scenario for both X and Y. In X, the worst case scenario is this lowest projected return, and there's a probability of 35% for that lowest return. Now, in franchise Y, the worst case scenario, or the lowest return, is this 119 million, and that has a probability of 0.2. So this worst case scenario is more likely to happen here in franchise X because it has a higher probability level. And the last question just asks what your personal investment strategy is when it comes to risk. So if you look at the higher projected returns on both X and Y, you can see that for franchise Y, that high projected return is much more likely to happen than in franchise X. But the low return in franchise X is more likely to happen here too. So, if it were me, I might look at Y just because there's a greater probability of this high investment and a low probability of this lower projected return. So that might be my personal strategy. So I'm just looking for answers that kind of reflect your personal preference on the weight or probability of those projected returns. And this last section here asks you to look at page 69 in your textbook at the coefficient of variance for both franchise X and franchise Y. And your book gives you those values. So the coefficient of variance, or CV, measures the variability of the probable return. And the larger the CV, the riskier that return is. A smaller CV indicates that the expected rate of return is very consistent or not expected to fluctuate much. So page 69 in your book tells us that the CV of X is 0.066, and that was for X. And the CV for franchise Y is 0.098. So knowing that the lower coefficient of variance means a less risky investment, does that affect which franchise you would invest in? And that gives us better information than just kind of eyeballing these various probabilities like we did in the last question. So now knowing this, if I am not a very risk tolerant person, that would make my decision a little bit easier in that the coefficient of variance for X is lower, and therefore this one is less risky. Now, if I was willing to take more of a risk, maybe I would try CVY, but I'm older. I'm older and I'm willing to take less risk these days in my life, so I would choose CVX.